morning, everyone. This is Elayne from Anabellas. Welcome back to Cross Stitch School lesson number 4. I hope everyone had a great week. I am filming from home today, so you might hear an echo in the background, maybe a couple dogs barking, but I hope everyone had a great week. Your homework last week was to try to finish up the chart. I did receive some messages that some of you haven't been able to do that, so that's okay. Today, what I thought I would do is just go over some tips and tools and some cross-stitch hacks so that you guys can use this week to go ahead and get that pattern finished up. So you're working on this chart. This is our free home cross-stitch chart, which you can get on crossstitchschool.com, and you can download the chart. You don't have to do this class in any particular order. There are 6 lessons, and they will be available to you at all times right here on this FlossTube channel. So those of you that are stitching along, I have looked in the Facebook group. You guys are doing great. I love the color changes that people have made and how you've really personalized your projects and made them your own. I am just thrilled that you guys are enjoying this class and that you're learning how to stitch and taking your time and getting the most of it. So what I thought I would do today is I'm just going to go through some tips that I think you should keep in mind as you begin your cross-stitch journey. One is how you organize your floss. I'm going to be inserting some photos here, and I'm going to be pausing the video now and again just so that you can look at how I store my own floss. I'll take some pictures and I'll insert them here. I'll include any links so that you can buy the same supplies if you'd like, either in my Etsy shop or in the Amazon store. So the first thing that I do is I use floss stick keys. Those are little plastic, we call them floss keys, that you wind your fabric, your floss around to keep your colors together. And I use just some simple bins that I got from Amazon. They're called art bins, and they have little dividers in them. And I use those to keep track of all my floss. So I'm going to show you those just in a minute. Then what I also thought I would share with you is how I protect my fabric. And when you stitch on a small piece like this, sometimes you don't need to protect your fabric. But as you can see, what's happened from me handling my fabric, so often during the past few weeks is that it's begun to fray. And the reason you want to protect these edges is if it frays too far, it will eat into your workable area, and you don't want that. You want to keep your cross-stitch fabric as you're working with it very, very safe. So there's 2 ways that you can do that. One is using fray stop or fray check. The other is to use blue masking tape and just tape your edges all the way around with blue masking tape. That is my personal method of choice. So those are 2 ways of making sure that you keep your cross-stitch piece very safe and secure as you're stitching. Then we talked a little bit about stitching in hand, which is the way I've taught you to stitch on my class. There are many other methods for holding your work steady as you're stitching. One way is, as I've taught you, stitching in hand. The other way is using a wooden embroidery hoop or using a Q-snap. Now, on larger pieces of fabric, I do recommend that you do use an embroidery hoop. I personally don't like Q-snaps. That's my personal preference. I just find them very heavy and very cumbersome, but I am going to include links here so that you can take a peek at them and at least give them a try. They're not that expensive. I think it's worth going ahead and making a purchase, maybe of an 8x8, and then you can just keep that and see if you feel comfortable using it. I am going to, I use hoops. I've used wooden hoops on and off for many years, and I use them more frequently now as I'm doing larger pieces. And wooden hoops are very inexpensive, and as I said, you can pick those up pretty much anywhere. The other thing that I want to just refresh your memory on is your tapestry needles. So using a needle that is the correct size for your Aida cloth or for your linen is important. And I'm going to go ahead and insert a chart here that you can screenshot and then download, but it's also in crossstitchschool.com's curriculum. You'll find it, I think, in lesson 1. So you will be able to know exactly what size tapestry needles that you want to use when you're stitching on 14 count Aida, for example, or 28 or 32 count linen. The size of your needle does matter. It does affect how it affects your fabric, and also how the floss that you're using is affected by the needle size. The other thing that I want to recommend that you keep in your stash is some needle minders. I'm sorry, needle threaders. We'll cover those first. Needle threaders. There's nothing more frustrating than trying to thread a needle when you're, right in the swing of things. So here are some needle threaders that I use. They're very inexpensive. You can get them pretty much at any, at Joann's or at Michael's. But I keep a bowl of these actually right on my Stitchy table so that they're right at my fingertips, and I use them quite a bit. If you've gotten Happy Mail from me, you've probably had these included in your Happy Mail. The other thing that I want to remind you is how to measure your thread when you're pulling it off the skein. And as I said before, you want to hold your thread in your finger and draw it up here, and that's where you make your cut. So you want to work about a full arm's length from your tip of your finger to your elbow, and that's about how long you want your thread to be before you cut it off the skein. So that just makes it very comfortable, and it helps keep it free from different tangles. Now, there's a lot of ways to organize your floss as you're stitching. We talked about how to organize it when you're storing it, but here are some photos of some different ways that you can organize your floss as you're stitching. You can use rings, you can use floss keys, you can use something as simple as masking tape and an extra piece of Aida. So, keeping your thread organized as you're stitching makes the whole project go a lot easier, rather than maybe digging around in a bag or trying to find your floss. So I always, I personally have begun to use floss keys, floss rings rather. So, but there's many different things that you can do. The other thing, which I probably should have mentioned at the very beginning, is that it's important that you wash your hands before you start to stitch. You will find as you stitch, if you're stitching in hand and folding your fabric, that you're going to get a dirty crease right here. And you can wash your fabric after you're done stitching, but if you take good care as you're stitching, you probably won't need to do that if you're practicing, good hygiene. So I always keep I always keep a bottle of Purell right at my Stitchy table so I can keep my hands clean, especially if I'm, drinking and the water from the glass is on my hands and it's touching my fabric, or if I'm having a snack, I just want to make sure I keep my hands clean and keep the dirt and the oils off of my Aida and off of my floss. The other thing I wanted to remind you is where you start your stitching. The way that I teach is to find the center of your fabric. So you fold your fabric in half, then you fold your fabric in half again, and you pinch it. And this is where you would begin, right at the center where you'll see that nice crisp crease. That is where the center of your fabric is. Now, there are some cross-stitch rulers that are on the market. Those cross-stitch rulers measure anywhere from 1 inch to 3 inch. And you just hold the ruler and it takes you in maybe 2 or 3 inches and shows you exactly where to start. If you want to start, for example, in the upper left-hand corner of your chart, and you want to leave 2 inches as an allowance for your finishing, you could place your cross-stitch ruler right there, and you would bring your needle to the 2-inch mark, and that would be the top left first stitch of your chart design, and that's where you would begin to stitch. So, there are many ways of where to start, but like I said, I've always started my cross-stitch charts directly from the center of my fabric. So I just want to remind you, to keep that in mind as you're stitching until you're comfortable making changes. Now, some things I want to point out to you, that it's really important that you're very, very careful about washing your finished fabric. You can go on many, many Facebook groups, and many of them will tell you that, oh, I've washed my fabric forever. The problem is, particularly with variegated floss and dyed floss, is that it will bleed. So be very careful washing, your fabric. Now, Again, if you're practicing good hygiene as you're stitching, keeping your hands free of oil and dirt, you know, you shouldn't have too much problem. But just be really, really careful when you're washing your fabric. Obviously in cold water, and just, you know, maybe do a spot test, because sometimes these fabrics, this floss will bleed. So you have to be really, really careful. You could instead just try to spot clean it. If you find that you've got, you know, a little mark or so, that's what I do. I had a big crease on a recent project, and I literally just spot cleaned it with some cold water and a little rag, and it came right out, and I didn't need to immerse my project. So be careful with that. Then the other thing is, a lot of us will iron our fabric when we're through. So again, it's the same sort of thing. You want to be very careful when you iron your fabric. I always put the finished piece down. You want to lay your iron very gently on top of your piece to set the stitches, and then just kind of, if you quilt, you know, just to lift and press, lift and press, lift and press. You don't want to go back and forth on your cross stitch when you are trying to get out the creases. Let's see what else I wanted to share with you, some other tricks. I guess that's it. You know, another way, I guess I'm going to backtrack real quick and just tell you that another way to protect your edges is, before you start stitching, is if you have a serger, you can serge your edges on your sewing machine. The other thing you can do is, if you have zigzag scissors, you could just kind of cut a very small edge all the way around, and sometimes that zigzag you know, will work well too. So those are just some of my little tips that I thought that I should point out to you, and some things that I thought you'd like to know. You know, in the Amazon store, you're going to see a bunch of different categories when you go to my shop. If you look in each category, the first one is floss keys and floss organizers. You're going to find all kinds of ideas there. I've included links to show you the favorite needles that I use, as well as the Q snaps that I've talked about today, some hoops, some glue and adhesives. I forgot to mention also that lighting is very important when you're stitching. There's nothing worse than stitching and then having your eyes strained, and then you kind of lose the joy of stitching. So I've gone ahead and shown you some of the lights I use. I use both an OT light and I use a daylight halo light. My OT lights, I have both a desktop OT light, and I also have a floor OT light, and I use my floor lamp most of the time. My daylight halo go I use when I travel, when I go to retreats, and you know, sometimes I'll just pull it out if I've got my grandchildren over so that they don't trip over the cord, and I'll just use my daylight you know, on my lap desk as I'm stitching and they're playing around me. So I wanted to be sure to point out that. The other thing is, we talked about project bags. You know, keeping your project with your floss and your chart safe when you're not stitching is really important. There are some beautiful project bag designers. You can find them all over Etsy, as well as, you know, on the internet. I've included in my Amazon shop some project bags that you can buy that are very, very inexpensive. I have used Amazon project bags for years. I do have some beautiful project bags. I haven't made any myself, but I have some that have been gifted to me, and they're absolutely beautiful. And I did buy a couple as well. The last thing that I want to mention that I didn't mention is magnifiers. I use a pair of clip-on magnifiers. I do wear glasses, and I do have a magnifier, a bifocal lens in my glasses, but still, when I'm working on very small counts, you know, if I'm working on 18 or higher, I go ahead and clip on those magnifying glasses right over my lenses. My husband says I look like Mr. Magoo, but I put them on anyway, and they just make it so much easier to stitch. I can see just fine as I'm stitching. So go ahead and check out the Amazon shop just for ideas, not necessarily to buy, but I want you to see what's available out there as you begin now to create your own stitchy space and you begin to get comfortable with cross stitching. Next week, we are going to be working on your border. So if you haven't completed your border, you can save that for next week. If not, go ahead and complete it if you want to complete the whole chart. And we're going to make sure, I'm going to give you some tips next week on how I get my border to line up. There's nothing worse than stitching and then finding that you come all the way down and your borders don't match. So I'm going to share with you next week how I do borders, just because I've not ever had a border not match up as I've stitched, because I learned this trick many, many years ago. So I'm going to share with you how I do it. Doesn't mean it's the right way, but it's my way. So I'm going to share that with you. And then the following week will be lesson number 6. And at Anabellas, we believe in keeping finishing fun. So our Finishing Made Fun class will kind of show you 2 or maybe even 3 different techniques on how you can finish this piece quickly, have some fun doing it, and then get it up and get it displayed or get it gifted to a friend. So if you are new, welcome to Cross Stitch School. Please visit crossstitchschool.com to download your free lesson as well as your chart. All of the lessons will be there. So as of today, you'll have lessons 1 through 4 with some lesson notes, which today will include some links so that you can, remember the things that we covered in this class. Again, if you ever have any questions, feel free to email me at info@anabellas.net. I hope to see everyone back here next week on Sunday and on regular Floss Tube, which will be next Friday. Until then, be happy, be well, and most of all, be kind. See you soon. Bye-bye.